about a minute, so as people to keep joining us, and we'll start at about 9:02. All right, we'll go ahead and get started today. So good morning and welcome to today's Farmer Roundtable Breakout session on manure management. Just like last week, I'm still Jamie Patton with the Nutrient and Pest Management Program, and I'm going to be your host today. So as you watch the slides scroll, I want you to take a minute and in your head anyway, thank the sponsors and the organizers for today's roundtable, because without their efforts, we wouldn't be here today. So a few housekeeping items. So as you watch them scroll through, like on any webinar, we're going to keep our videos as well as our microphones muted until we're asked to do so. If you're having difficulty with your computer audio in WebEx, which is different than Zoom, you have that control panel. It's a long, skinny panel, oftentimes to the side. If you're having problems with your audio, you can click on the audio button, click on phone call, and it will provide you the dial-up information to get in on your phone. In addition, we have questions, so you can type those in the question box in that same control panel at any time during the presentations, and those will be fed into our computer systems, and we'll be able to ask those to the speaker as we move on through today. And lastly, there will be CCA credits available. That CCA QR code will be broadcast on the screen at the end of the session. If you do not have the scanner for the CCA, you're able to type your name as well as your CCA number in the question box. But we ask that you wait until the end of the seminar in order to do that. So with that, let's get started. Get me off the screen and get John. So I would like you to, feels like a Monday morning. I apologize, everyone. I just can't speak today. So let me take this opportunity to introduce our presenter today, John VandenBoom. Good thing he's going to take the role of telling us a little bit about himself as well as manure handling on Holsum Dairies.
All right, can everybody hear me?
We can.
Sure can.
Perfect. And you can see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I hope everybody's having a good Groundhog's Day. I think this morning I saw that we have, at least from Puxatawny, Phil, have 6 more weeks of winter, but we'll see. We got some cold coming. So I just want to take a minute to introduce myself. I am John VandenBoom. I kind of the agronomy manager here at Holsum Dairies. I grew up in Chilton, right here in Calumet County. Originally went to school for natural resources at Stevens Point. I worked for Calumet County for a while, and then in 2018 I was offered a position here to kind of help manage the manure side of things, and then went to Fox Valley Tech for some agronomy schooling, and now kind of take care of the agronomy side of things and manure side of things at Holsum. So a little bit about Holsum Dairies. There's actually 2 sites. There's Holsum Irish and Holsum Elm. They're both located by Hilbert. Roughly 4,500 cows at each site. Give or take a little bit depending on the year and things. We grow and harvest corn, silage, and alfalfa. Those are our primary feeds. We don't really do any other type of forages, mainly just because of pad space. So we only have enough pad space for corn, silage, and alfalfa. And when you start making different piles of feeds and trying to incorporate those, it becomes difficult for our space. So depending on how much carryover we have from the previous year, usually it's 6,000 acres of corn silage and 3,000 to 4,000 acres of alfalfa, depending on cow numbers and carry over how good the year was previous. And because we need those acreage for feed, we do not nearly have enough acres of owned and rented ground to grow enough feed for ourselves. So we only produce roughly 30% of the feed we need, meaning we rely on a lot of other growers to grow for us, and we work and partner with them. 40 growers roughly currently grow feed for us, and then as a relationship buying feed from them, we also sell manure back to them. So we have roughly 40 growers, but we have over 50 producers that buy manure. So we have individuals that purchase manure that don't even grow feed for us. And it works. It's been working out great. And with those acreage, we have roughly 30,000 acres in our nutrient management plan with all those growers and people looking to get manure from us. So when both dairies were built, Irish was built first, and then a couple of years later, Elm was built. But they both had an anaerobic digester built with them. They were both installed by DVO, and with these anaerobic digesters, with the lack of oxygen and bacteria inside them, they break down the organic matter present in the manure, and this simplified results in a gas that is collected and a digestate, which would be your liquids and solids that come out. So very simply, manure kind of flows through in this one here at Elm like a U shape. It flows through, and we're able to pull off gas and then separate liquids and solids coming off of it. There are some many advantages why we put them in. A big one is odor reduction, so that methane coming off there is collected. It does reduce pathogens with the anaerobic process. With the heat and anaerobic process, it also kills weed seeds. And then, of course, like I said, you're left with a biogas that's able to be used and solids and liquids for fertilizer or solids for bedding. There are some disadvantages that we've seen with our digesters, and there's definitely different digesters out there. But one, when it's cold and like this time of year when you're scraping manure, the manure flowing into the digesters is cold, and you have to maintain a temperature in these digesters. As you can see, these are down in the ground and insulated. But when you're scraping frozen manure into them, you do have to maintain that heat to keep the bacteria going. The other big issue we have, and it's not often all the time, but even with we don't bed with any sand, just the solids from the digester, but we do have these digester solids here. This is the sample showing kind of what the nutrient is, but we do have to lower skid steers down in there. We partner with the local fire department and have safety on hand, and gas masks have to be worn and monitored very closely. But we do have to go clean all the sediment out of those digesters because it does start filling up, and the solids that come out are like a gravelly sand sludge type stuff that we have to scrape out of there. It's not a fun environment for anybody to go down and clean out, but we do have to do that because they do start settling down, and that just comes from pens being scraped and feed on the pad, the concrete pad, when the bucket's scraping over it and feeding. You just end up with sediment. Even feed coming in has sediment in there, and eventually the digesters have to be cleaned out. And it does have a lot of nutrients in it. This sample, it says dairy liquid, although it's at 34 dry matter, so not sure why it was quite run like that, but it does have a lot of nutrients in, and it's quite a process to clean out. So that's a little disadvantage, but that only maybe once every 5 years. So other than that, they run pretty good. And then the other thing that can be a advantage or disadvantage, depending on how you look at it, is nutrient availability in the liquid. We'll talk a little bit more about that and why I personally think it can be a pro and a con. So historically, our digesters have always taken the biogas and turned the methane to electricity. Historically, when the dairy started, utility companies, it was mandated on them that 15% of that power had to be renewable. So we were getting paid bonuses for having this electricity as renewable. Now with solar and wind, the power companies don't need the dairy for the renewable energy, and so the price we were getting for that went down. So 2 years ago, Holsum did a feasibility study on turning that methane, instead of using it to turn into electricity and powering houses, taking that and putting that into the natural gas line and selling that gas into the gas line. That feasibility study turned out it was really favorable. And in November 2019, we started building a gas building where we would clean and scrub the gas, pressurize it, and put it into the gas line. We built a pipeline from Irish. We directionally bored a pipeline from Irish to Elm, and Elm is the location where we have our building that we clean and scrub the gas. And we also have other dairies, Deer Run, Clover Hill, S&S Dairy, and Dolman East River Dairy bring gas to us on trucks like these, where it's then put in a gas line. And the reason Elm was chosen is because right through the dairy, right next to our pits, we have a natural gas line that runs right through the dairy, actually cuts it in half. Our feed pads on one side and the barns are on the other. So it worked out great. With Irish and Elm, just the two dairies, we provide enough gas to heat and cool roughly like 1,800 Wisconsin homes. This gas, however, does go in the gas line, and it's used, wherever the closest gas probably goes to. But it's, I guess, earmarked or in paper is for California. So the possibility of it being used in California is there with this pipeline connected. So, and California, they focus on their low carbon fuel standard for transportation. So this gas goes, hypothetically, it's not used there, but it could be used in California for transportation, and that's where we can get bonus money with this renewable gas. That's what makes it so worth it, scrubbing and cleaning this gas. It has the ability to displace nearly 900,000 gallons of gasoline. So that's what we've been doing with our gas lately. It just finished in June, so it's only been really going for a little over half a year. And we've had ups and downs there. I'm not expert by any means on this side of the digesters. I'm more agronomy, using the manure and stuff. So my knowledge base on what we actually have to do with the gas is very small. So that's one of the great products from the digester. The other here is the solids that we use. Here's a screw press. The solids are compressed out of the liquid, and you get a product like this. After they're separated through the screw press, we have a dryer like this. This is the dryer. It's located at our Elm location. The bedding solids go through this dryer, and they dry from moisture of coming out of the screw press at roughly 70% down to 50% moisture. So here's a sample that's been taken in looking at the coliform and E. coli numbers. You can see pre-dried and post-drying. And the reason we have been sending it through this dryer, when we first started using the solids for bedding, we had really high rates of mastitis. Our somatic cell count was high. In this dryer, drying at this high temp kind of pasteurizes the bedding. So we immediately saw somatic cell count go down and cases of mastitis go down. And to this day, if the dryer's not running for some reason in maintenance just for a week, the day after we use wet bedding, it is noticeable the next day in the somatic cell count. So it's been real important. The other thing you'll notice is we only go from yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, we go to 50% moisture or 50% dry matter when we dry. You don't want to go too much more than that. We've noticed if it's drier, it becomes real dusty, blowing around in the wind, gets in the cows, and it's not great there. So it's been real great. The cows have done great on it. We can use the wet bedding for some. We've used it for dry cows and heifers a little bit there. We don't raise our heifers are custom raised, but we do raise the calves when they're little. During the summer, we can use some of that wet bedding, so we don't have to run the dryers maybe for all of that. But other than that, for all the milk cows at Irish and Elm, bedding is trucked from Elm over to Irish, so we have dry bedding for them. We have looked at so the screw presses do not run all the time at the dairies. We just produce enough bedding for what we need. The rest goes out into the pits. We have looked at running the screw presses continuously, keeping all the solids and then spreading solids with spreaders and keeping those nutrients in the solid form. So I looked at that real close last year, doing kind of a cost benefit analysis. The problem we ran into, and we'll get into that a little bit, is our liquid manure already does not have a high phosphorus rate, and the theory was that we could maybe put on more manure closer and pump more liquid on, and then not have to truck as much liquid if we were able to do these solids. And the price for spreading these solids, it worked out pretty good. That it made sense to spread. Where the issue came in is it didn't lower the amount of gallons we could put on close because of the amount of nitrogen. So the amount of nitrogen didn't really change with our samples from running the presses all the time to not, and so that didn't really help us that much. So we continually only run the presses when we need more bedding. So. Getting in now, so we got the biogas, and we got the solids. Getting into the liquid now, and this is kind of the part that I get interested in, because this comes into the more agronomy side of things. So here's a simple liquid manure sample from the Holsum Pond 3. So we have multiple manure lagoons at each site, and the manure does help us some, because the solids do settle out in the first pits, and then the manure does thin out towards the third or pit. So this is a typical liquid manure sample from our Holsum Pond 3, and you'll notice that phosphorus is not high on these, with some of the solids taken out and going through the digester, and then again with a pit separation. And the reason we really like this is because we can go on hay ground with low dry matter, and we can apply after each crop of hay and put manure out there. And that's been for the past number of years our favorite way to apply manure, because you get those windows after each hay crop, and our growers really enjoy getting some, especially if it's dry during the summer, getting some moisture on that hay. It tends to snap back real quick. As long as you can get it on there, as long as it's dry weather. More and more people are already doing this, but with Holsum manure being as let's say as thin as it is, it soaks right in, and it's sometimes you can't even tell anything was on there, especially in your July, August time frame when it's dry. We can put a, if let's say we're shooting for 6 ton of alfalfa, and 13 pounds of phosphorus per ton, we can put on a decent amount here of liquid manure without worrying about even raising phosphorus levels too high. So we really like it for that point. In my personal, I don't know that we have much data on this, but I do think some of that liquid does help push yields a little bit, especially when it's dry. I also tend to think, and this I even have less data on, but I think with the maybe tighter cutting windows and the manure application over it, I do think that possibly some insect pressure is lessened with the manure. I don't have any data on that, but it's just something that I think I've noticed. So here would be this. Now we're jumping over to Irish, but kind of similar to elm too, with our early the pits that are early on in separation. So we have a little bit higher dry matter here, a little thicker manure. The reason this it also helps too is so if we have less nutrients in our thinner manure, we can put on more rates, a little higher rate with hose close to the dairy. And then when we are trucking it to growers that maybe aren't as close and we have to load it on trucks, then we're not just hauling water. And because we are billing, we're selling this manure, so if we can put more nutrients on there, and we sell based on nutrients, so if we can do that, we're better off than just trucking water. So we'd rather have some nutrients there to make it worth moving. So let's see. So just getting into back again, when I said there can be pros and cons about highly available nutrients in the liquid after manure application. So I hope everybody can see this, but over in this corner you see a little, over on the right side you see a little yellow dot. Many of you probably already know what that is. That's a tile inlet in the corner, and the picture isn't the greatest picture. I apologize. I'm horrible at taking pictures when we're doing things. That's just the last thing on my mind. Even when we got a smartphone in your hand all the time, you can take great pictures, but I just tend not to take them because I forget about it. So, but this here was we did a manure application on this field in spring, and then it was planted to soybeans, and you can see right to the line where it is darker green where manure was applied, and then the lighter green towards the tile inlet where we stayed away, and you could see right to the line where manure had been applied and then had not been applied. And so I think I tend to see, and this is another thing where I don't have data to back it up, and we haven't run tests, but with the digested manure, I tend to think that nutrients are available right away. So you have less breakdown of the nutrients that have to happen with undigested manure. through the digester when the nitrogen that's in it, even the phosphorus and potassium, when it's applied, it's available, I think, right away. So which can be it's a great benefit if you're putting the manure right before the crop. The one thing that we've run into is that, so on our Kiwani clay soils, when we tend to do manure applications in the fall, which I think is big for a lot of people. If we do the manure applications in the fall, I don't expect the nitrogen to be there from the manure the following year. We found that we have to supplement nitrogen. We can't hope that nitrogen's there for the corn crop the following year. Now, spring applied manure, I think we tend to get a lot of benefit out of that, and I think that corn crop does spectacular. We had some great growers in some lighter soil that took manure this past spring, and they had absolutely phenomenal corn silage. But when we put it on in fall, it's been my experience that because of whatever form it's in, it's so available that it's not there for the corn when it needs it the next summer. So this was the soybean example being there and planted right after. Here the roots from those soybeans, just because I had growers questioning, well, are they making their own nitrogen? The ones that got manure, they're just going to grow off that. They're going to run out. This was what I took a picture just to compare roots. I couldn't find any difference. So this was not our field. So Holsum Fields and the fields that we rent are have been in the past strictly corn silage and alfalfa. This was a grower, so I don't have yield data on it and compared to that section of the field, but it's just a picture just because I had guys question me if there's what they look like. So the other thing we did this past summer is we worked with Calumet County Ag Stewardship Alliance, which is our watershed group in Calumet County, and we did a field day trying different applications of manure. So the history of this field, we had a wheat crop that was combined, and then we wanted to go, the grower wanted to then go to oats to be harvested later in the year for forage. So what we did was we sectioned off a field and we looked at different types of manure application. One being low disturbance manure application with a soil star type toolbar, and it had 30-inch spacing in between the units. One was your standard Pottinger disc, and then we also looked at no-tilling oats right into the wheat stubble, and then once the oats came up, applying manure over the top of them. And then we also looked at working the oat stubble, then drilling in, or working the wheat stubble, then planting the oats, and then putting manure over the top of them, both with dribble bars. So just some, and this just goes to my point of how I think available the nutrients are in the digested manure. So if you can see in this picture, you can kind of see some rows where it's dark green. This was after the oats were harvested, but you could still easily notice it. It was very, very noticeable in the soil star unit that we use with 30-inch spacing. You could see exactly where the manure was, and the oats there were 2 to 3 inches for sure taller than the oats in between the rows. And planting right after that manure was applied, those oats definitely benefited, and you could clearly see the benefit that the manure gave these oats. The downfall is that in between these rows with the minimal disturbance, you had oats that were shorter, and I don't think the oats that are taller were able to make up for the shorter oats. You had competition there. So being what we saw there, I think with a 30-inch soil starter, if you were able to go and plant right on the 30-inch rows, I think you'd be very far ahead. But I do think this nutrient banding, even though it was just an oats, I think it might even show up, especially would show up if you did it right before corn crop. But even now going to corn next year, I think that might even be visible. What we did with the no-till oats and the oats that were planted after being worked with the manure going over the top of them, we were real happy with how those worked, and that's something we've been doing more and more of, is no-tilling into, or growers no-tilling oats into the wheat stubble and then going over the top. We really like that, and we get a lot of benefit. So one downfall we had with working the field first and then planting is that loose dirt and the hose tends to smear pretty good. So it has to be no-tilled for what we saw. Otherwise, we had too many oats that were just getting smeared under. Let's see. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, and so now with that we've tried the 30-inch rows and the minimal disturbance. What we have our manure crew that does our own pumping. We're looking at 16-inch rows, minimal disturbance, a bazooka toolbar. We think that 16-inch being closer, we won't see the banding quite as much as looking more at corn. We think that manure is close enough together where the roots will be able to reach. So that's the direction we're planning on going, at least Holsum applying manure. We do see a big benefit having the minimal disturbance. So when we come back, and now especially in spring and before you want to plant oats, if we can get that minimal disturbance, the soil structure being there helps that field dry out, in my opinion, 2 or 3 days almost earlier, depending on weather and how dry it is. And it allows you to get that next crop in there that much sooner. And when you're reeling up hose and you're out in the field, even though you're only 16 inches, having that structure there allows that hose cart to ride without creating big ruts and just smushing everything in the field. And that structure we found really helps. So the other thing we looked at, this was in 2019, was using our manure and applying it over growing corn. So we've done oats, you know, and that we had lots of success with that. But to be honest, if the oat crop was wrecked, some of the growers were like, it's more of a cover crop than if I don't get any forage. They weren't huge losses. So going to corn was a whole nother story when you're talking about possibly driving over corn and wrecking the corn. That was definitely a little different. So we tried CCASA again with some other groups. We did applications of manure over growing corn. Here's a picture of the dribble bar driving diagonally over the corn. We also did up and down with a tanker pulled between the rows and putting manure in. We also experimented with some cover crops in between the rows. Here you can see some red clover was put in between the rows. So we really liked. There were some things we liked and some things we didn't like. One, the timing. Like I said, some of these Kiwani soils, we don't like putting manure on in spring, otherwise we end up with balls of clay, and getting that planted is never fun. So we like the idea of putting it on, and when there's a crop there, getting these very available nutrients. That's what I keep going to. So that really piqued our interest, getting more out of our manure instead of saying, well, we just lost all of our nitrogen, it went out to tile line or somewhere else. We liked the idea the corn was going to be able to utilize it right away. A couple of things we didn't like was you had to have very, very specific conditions. We did see some, I think we saw some yield hit on some of the wheel traffic going across. The corn did come back, but I just thought it has to be really dry, or we saw compaction that kind of stunted some of these corns. Even and the tankers going up and down the rows, there's the sheer weight there too, affected some of the corn on either side. So there's some really great things we saw. We realized that dragging the hose across did not affect the corn too much. I thought it was the wheel traffic that did the most. The one thing we did see a little bit is if you have that loose ground, that hose tends to smear a little bit. But being that it's been planted and up a little bit, it gives that time, that corn time to firm up. So, but taking some of these things together with what we liked and what we didn't like, we went forward here in the 2020 with a plan to try some different things. So, and this is what we ended up trying, and so far it's been my favorite. So, this here was a alfalfa field, and in the winter of 2018-2020 or 2019-2020, we had a lot of alfalfa winter kill. So, not ideal when you have to plant a whole bunch of alfalfa, but it did allow us a lot of opportunities to no-till corn into alfalfa like this. So you can see it's been planted, and this was 2 days after it was planted. We had a dry spring, and we came out with the dribble bar and the manure, and we splashed on 12,000 over the top of this. And so what we were able to do is minimize two things. One, we had a no-till field with alfalfa stubble left out here, so the hose traveled beautifully across the field with minimal damage. Two, the corn was still just planted; it was not out of the ground. We had zero corn damage from traffic or hose going over it. And because you should not be hopefully mudding in corn, it should be dry. So as soon as it was planted, we tried to be right behind the planter, putting out this manure. We did have very, very firm fields this past spring. Actually, the custom guy that plants our corn, he broke his planter twice just because he had his planter maxed out on downforce trying to put the seed into the ground. Doesn't sound ideal, but if you looked at these seed trenches, because the ground was so firm, it covered that seed, and we had perfect seed placement, and there was no open trenches or anything like that. The ground crumbled, although it was really hard. And after we put some manure in here and got some rain, the corn was up and rocking, and did what it was. This here field was our best field we had this year. So we do plan on doing more of that. We really liked how it worked. We have manure going out in spring. We got a no-till field. It's soaked in perfectly. Maybe not all years are going to end up this nice, working this nice, but we definitely, for future, if we have a hay field coming out with corn going into it, that is what we plan on doing. So now 2021, we did plan on, so we took that idea of no-tilling corn and this, we planted all. Now the idea was to go completely no-till on some of these fields where we weren't gonna work the field at all, even though plant the rye. That did get screwed up by this picture down here on the right. We had a fire this past fall at our straw shed, and all of a sudden we had 3,000 large square bales of straw we had to get rid of. we had to dig it all out and hose it all 3,000 wet straw bales, and so that kind of screwed up. So harvesting the rye, putting manure over the top, just like alfalfa, right after it's planted. It worked made with the no-till. So that's kind of what we like to do, using the manure, possibly even doing applications of manure on the rye, and then after the corn is planted, making sure that these crops can utilize it. We'd like to get away from putting it out in the fall and pretty much knowing that we don't have that nitrogen there for the next crop. So that's what I have. So if there's any questions, you can shoot away. But that's kind of how that's our basis of what we've been trying to do here. We really like the digesters and the nutrients that it gives us. So we're gonna try to keep working on making sure we utilize that as best we can. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John. So we will be sure, if you have questions, type those into the question box. Again, it's in your control panel, and we will get started on some questions. So, first up, what is your favorite part of using the manure digester or this whole process?
It may sound a little weird, but really I like the environment, how environmentally friendly it can be. I guess not even environmentally friendly, even before that, it's kind of neighbor relations. I do think that it's kind of a small point, and I kind of go over, but just smell. Being able to contain the manure and using it more than just, we're getting more out of the manure than just having it sit in the pit. And the more you can use the nutrients for manure, the better. But even getting more of that, like biogas and bedding, and keeping the smell down and keeping I think the dairy clean. It really just the neighbor relations, I think, sometimes gets looked over how much it can help. I think that's it deserves more credit than what it gets sometimes.
So as the agronomy manager, when you look at all of these different products, so how many different manure products are you actually handling? So we have sludge and solids and several different kinds of liquids. What's the challenge? How much time does it take you to navigate all the nutrient availabilities and all these different types of manure? And what are your strategies for getting them out?
So that's almost the easier part of the job. The not the hardest part of the job, and not, it's actually part that I like because I just get to talk with people. But we have 50 different producers that are purchasing manure from the dairy, from guys that have a 40-acre field, and that's all they have. But they farm that 40-acre field, and sometimes just hay, and they like getting the liquid over the top of it to guys that have thousands of acres. So the biggest thing is okay, communicating, we want manure over here, we don't want manure here, we're going to this crop, going to that crop, we can put so much here, we want this there. Just making sure that the rates and where we're taking manure keeps matching up, because I don't have everybody's farm plan, so there's a lot of communication that has to happen. And I don't mind talking with farmers all the time, that's or anybody. I mean, that's probably one of the best parts of the job, but it is the most, it's probably the biggest part of the job, just making sure that is straight. So
there's a lot of interest in selling manure and moving manure across the landscape to different farms. So for many of our farms that have excess nutrients, can you kind of describe the process of how you go about selling manure and tracking that? Who pays the transportation costs? Things along those lines, the nuances of getting manure to another farm.
Sure. So there's usually it's kind of worked in the past. Like I said, we have people that get manure that aren't growers, that grow feed, but usually, so priority is given. we try to give it to growers that grow feed for us. So there's usually, now the past couple of years with 2018, 2019, there's been it's been just an issue getting manure out. Period. Everybody knows the weather. This past year was a little different. We could focus a little bit more on, we want to go manure here, we want to go manure there. We were able to pick and choose a little bit more. So the way it works is we charge 50% of the commercial nutrient value. So if you can see this slide here, we take the first year nutrients for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur, and we turn that into a dollar amount for what it would be getting commercial fertilizer from a local co-op, and then we cut that in half. So it's half of that value. For alfalfa, that doesn't need the nitrogen, we don't charge nitrogen for alfalfa. We just charge phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur for the alfalfa. So we kind of, that's how the billing goes. The dairy takes care of the transportation, the pumping, and we, as long as the field is big enough, we do irrigate everything on the field. So we've gotten, unless, if we can, we will truck onto a field, but with our growers, it's been, we irrigate most everything now, working it in usually with a pottinger, sometimes, or now getting to low disturbance, and then with the alfalfa, the dribble bar. So that's kind of how the billing or the charging for manure side of things works. I don't think, I guess there's a few more things, but that's about how we've organized it. So.
This is, sorry, I was muted. This is a perfect time to have this slide up. So this sludge with the amount of phosphorus is in it. So what challenges do you have managing this product? If any?
So luckily this only comes around once every 4 or 5 years, but then when you have 2 digesters, then it comes around half that time. So it's always difficult, one, because it's not a quick process. So it takes multiple days to do, and then you like to do it when there's maybe not as much going on in summer, but then you got to find a field that doesn't have a crop going, and like I said, it can really rack up the phosphorus level quickly. So whenever this comes around, we try to plan it out a year in advance, working with growers. We do have fields of Holsums that we can put it on, but we not that we try not to, but if we would put it on our fields every single time, our watching our phosphorus levels, we can't get too high. So we try to work with other growers and try to spread it out as best we can, because we do get there's a sizable amount that comes out of the digesters. So yeah, that's always it's probably one of the most challenging things to just the sludge get rid of, because you can't be blowing phosphorus levels out of the water. So
yeah, it's a great product. Like I said, finding the place that needs it is maybe the challenge. So we do have a question.
Right.
Do you have any running or ponding issues with surface applying manure with only 1% solids?
Yes, that's another downfall. So depending on how dry, obviously the weather plays a huge issue, but the drier it is, the better. So for example, we'll put generally a target we have is like a 12,000, because most of your fields are tiled now, so we don't go over 12 when we're surface applying liquid manure. But on hay crops, they're depending on moisture, but if it's dry, we can put 12,000 out, and within an hour or two I can walk across it and it looks dry. We could put another 12,000 across. So I've heard before I was here, when the dairy first started back, 2000 or early 2000s. There were times I think that they put almost 30,000 gallons per acre on a surface application with dried, cracked clay soils. Now looking back, probably not the best thing to do, but the soil just sucked it up and it just disappeared with you got that dry clay soil. Now obviously that hasn't been done for a while, but when you have wet soils, without a doubt, I am jealous of all the maybe, let's say, different farms that have different manures that are thicker. When I just see it go splat and hit the ground and not going anywhere, if ours is not worked in immediately after it hits the ground and there's any moisture on, it does run. So when before irrigation, with it coming out right by the pottinger and you had to truck it on and then work it in after, if you're not following right behind that truck and there's any slope, that manure is definitely running. So it's another challenge. But on the other hand, being thin, when you have a hay crop and you put the manure out there, like I said, if you're 30,000, there's no smothering of anything. The solids aren't covering anything up. The field barely looks any more brown than it did. So that's kind of a benefit of having that thinner manure as well. So there's definitely some give and take. But I do get jealous when I see other people applying manure and it just kind of goes splat, and ours definitely will run if you're not right there with the disc.
Excellent. So we know in-season manure applications are ideal, particularly since we have a growing crop to take up that nutrient. So it sounds like much of your manure goes out in season. So do you have an idea of how much in season and the rest spring and fall?
So I just did some math kind of yesterday. So I don't have maybe exact numbers, but roughly with the two dairies, and then the calf facility, 160 million roughly, give or take a little bit, depending on the year and how, really depending on the year, depending on how much water you have collecting off the feed pad also. It makes a huge difference. But so that's a total amount of gallons with the two dairies. If we have decent hay crops, using those, I think my math came out to, if we had really dry and we got the full rates, which doesn't happen, but if it could, just on hay alone and maybe on oats, we could try to, I think, close to 100 million gallons during summer manure, kind of alfalfa and oats. We could get rid of that many gallons. So that doesn't include some in springtime before corn, and then the rest being in fall.
Okay. We have a question. When you say you aren't getting any N from fall applied manure, are you talking about ammonia N or total N?
So mostly total N, and I won't say we don't get any, but so hypothetically, if you go off of this sample, let's go to a liquid sample. So let's say you applied 10,000, or let's say you went 10,000, just because the math's easier in my head. And this would, and we incorporated right away. That would tell me, 61 pounds of nitrogen should be their first year. If we stick with that and we figure 61 pounds, our corn crop seems like it is continuously short on nitrogen with our fall applied. Now, if it's spring applied, I definitely think you get your bang for your buck, and I personally noticed the difference with how the corn looks, just nitrogen wise, what it's able to utilize. So whether it's coming out the tile with some fall rains or spring rains, or going to the atmosphere, but if we were to put 10,000 and it's telling us 61 pounds, I do not bank on that being there.
Have you ever tried any stabilizers to see if it has any effect on that N?
No, we have not at this point, but I've kind of been looking at it, seeing if it would make a difference. Like I said, so the being digested manure is a little different too. For talking to different representatives, I don't know if we'd get as much benefit out of the nitrogen stabilizer or not. So we have not tried it, but having growers that that they pay for nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, and like I said, there's some we do get some nitrogen. It's not, we don't count for it all in fall.
Excellent.
They would look. I think going forward, we're going to look at some stabilizers just because they're the charge is there, and it's only half of the value. But if we still want to make sure that try to make sure that's getting something out of it.
So we have a question. Do you see any increase in white mold issues in soybeans if you spring apply manure?
I can't say for sure. Biggest, and so that's something we looked at. The biggest reason I can't say for sure is because Holsum's rotation is alfalfa and corn silage. Now we're mixing in rye, trying to get more cover crops going. But so for the longest time on acreage that we own and rent, we hadn't grown any soybeans. So from personal growing experience, I can't say one way or the other. So just talking with growers, it's split. Some growers will not put on manure before beans. I should say in spring before beans. Most growers that get manure from us will put manure on in fall before beans, because like I said, I feel like so that 61 pounds of, let's say, nitrogen that should be there, I don't know that it's there. So I haven't seen issues with fall applied manure going to beans. Spring applied, I have seen some very fast, tall growing beans that can lead to white mold, but I can't say for sure one way or the other.
Okay, thank you. Do you hire specialized individuals for running your digesters and biogas facilities, or do you send them to training, hire them and send them to training, or train them on the job?
Dr. Bob Nagel, who was the manager here for quite a while, he has more knowledge than I do. As far as the biogas and running the facility, we have the gas facility, we have specialized individuals we hired to run that. Him going through the process of building the facility, he knows how to run a lot of that, so he kind of does a lot in the gas building. The digesters, our maintenance crew has been trained to run the digesters, and we've done training for enclosed spaces for cleaning them out, and so it's we have a few. Our maintenance crew specialize in making sure the digesters run and perform the way they're supposed to.
Thank you. So hopefully, and we'll take one last question in a second. So Emily, if you would, if we're able to throw up that CCA credit. So for those who are needing CCAs, go ahead and scan the CCA QR code, or put your name and number in the chat box, and we'll get there. And as we do that, there will also be, for those of you who are online, there will be a survey that's going to be posted in the chat box if you'd like to take that now. Otherwise, it will be also included in a follow-up email. If you have any last questions, please make sure you get those in the question box. So have you looked into irrigating some of the thin liquid manures?
So we do have a irrigation system by Elm, pivot irrigation. Currently, it's not. We don't have the permit to use it. We have used it in the past. We've run into the timing with wind and stuff like that. It's harder to get the perfect conditions for it to use the pivot irrigation. The only time that we've used it since I've been here in 2018, we use it on alfalfa maybe 2 weeks after cutting. It was dry, and we wanted to try it and see how it worked. It worked okay, but you could notice it was a dry time of year, sunny, and you could notice where the manure had gone. You could see just a little bit lighter yellow in the circle where the irrigation had gone. It turned leaves just I mean, driving by, you probably wouldn't even notice it unless you really knew you used the irrigation system. So without actually knowing it, you could barely tell. But I think what happened was the manure just stayed on the leaves, and it's thin and watery. But even still, if it dries, it's like drying muddy water kind of on leaves. So I think it just kind of dried on there being sunny and dry the way it was. So we didn't notice any yield difference. It grew right out of it. But so we haven't used it too much, and we haven't used it really lately. So
Very good. So attendees, if you have any last questions, please put those in the question box. Otherwise, as I'm waiting for any more questions to come, I want to thank John for joining us today, and to remind you that we do have 2 more upcoming breakout sessions. So next week, we're going to, same time, same place, we're going to be talking with Adam Abel and Dan Dietrich about grazing and grazing of cover crops. And the week after that, we will be chatting again with John and Nick Dahlman about period irrigation and irrigation guns. So we'll get you more questions about irrigations then, John. So if you haven't, please go ahead and sign up. There's plenty of time to register. And again, thank you, Emily, for putting up our planning team and our sponsors. I don't see any more questions coming into the question box. So with that, I thank everyone for their attendance today. Again, thank John for sharing his knowledge, wisdom, and experience with us. It was a great day. And we will be back again next week at 9 a.m. to talk grazing. Thank you all.